Did you know that Earth is hiding places so bizarre they seem to belong on another planet? A glacier appears to bleed across Antarctica. Stones move by themselves through a desert. Mysterious lights hover over a Norwegian valley, and ancient structures rest beneath the ocean, with origins still debated. Scientists have spent decades studying these phenomena, yet some questions remain unanswered. What forces created them, and what secrets are still hidden? Get ready to explore Earth's most impossible mysteries and discover what remains unexplained today. Shanay-Timpishka, the boiling river, Peru. Deep inside the Peruvian Amazon flows a river so hot that animals falling into parts of it can die from the heat. For generations, indigenous communities described this steaming waterway, yet scientists once considered the stories nearly impossible. The reason was simple. Rivers approaching such temperatures are normally associated with active volcanic or powerful geothermal systems, but the nearest active volcano is hundreds of miles away. When geophysicist Andres Russo investigated the river, he measured temperatures reaching around 86 degrees Celsius, confirming that the phenomenon was very real. The leading explanation suggests that deeply heated groundwater rises through faults and fractures before entering the river. But one major question remains. Why does this particular geological system concentrate enough heat to create such extreme temperatures without a nearby volcanic source? For centuries, local people knew the river existed. Modern science eventually confirmed it. Understanding exactly why it becomes so hot has proven far more difficult. Devil's Kettle Falls, Minnesota, USA. At Devil's Kettle Falls, the Brule River reaches a rocky waterfall and suddenly splits in two. One side continues downstream exactly as expected. The other plunges into a deep opening in the rock and seems to disappear. For decades, people tried to determine where that water went. Dye, floating objects, logs, and other traces were reportedly dropped into the opening in hopes that they would reappear farther downstream. They did not. Later, hydrological measurements suggested something surprising. The amount of water downstream was consistent with the water entering the falls. That means the missing flow probably rejoins the river somewhere below the visible surface. But that creates another mystery. If the water returns through a relatively straightforward underground route, why were the traces so difficult to recover? Geologists have a likely explanation for the disappearing water, but the hidden route beneath Devil's Kettle remains unseen, leaving one famous question still hanging beneath the waterfall. Nazca lines, Peru. Across the dry plains of southern Peru, enormous monkeys, spiders, birds, geometric figures, and perfectly straight lines stretch across the desert. Some are so large that their complete forms are far easier to recognize from the air than from the ground. The Nazca people created these geoglyphs roughly 2,000 years ago by removing dark surface stones and exposing lighter soil underneath. The desert climate preserved them with remarkable clarity. Scientists understand how the lines were made. What remains far less certain is why. Researchers have proposed ceremonial pathways, astronomical markers, religious symbols, water-related rituals, and offerings connected to ancient beliefs. None of these explanations has produced complete scholarly agreement. Modern aerial surveys and artificial intelligence have also revealed additional figures that were previously unknown, suggesting that the landscape may still hold more discoveries. The Nazca lines are not mysterious because ancient people could not create them. The mystery is what message, ritual, or purpose justified creating them on such an enormous scale. Fairy circles, Namibia. Across the grasslands bordering the Namib Desert, millions of nearly circular patches of bare earth appear in patterns so regular that they can look deliberately engineered from above. Many circles measure several meters across. Grass grows densely around their edges, while the centers remain almost completely empty. Even stranger, the circles are spaced with remarkable consistency across enormous areas of desert. Scientists have spent decades debating what creates them. One major theory argues that sand termites remove vegetation and modify underground moisture, producing circular bare zones. Another proposes that the pattern emerges naturally as grasses compete for extremely limited water, creating self-organized spacing without termites controlling the process. Both explanations have supporting evidence. Neither has completely eliminated the other. That is what makes Namibia's fairy circles so compelling. Scientists understand many of the biological and environmental forces involved, but the exact balance between insects, vegetation, rainfall, and underground moisture continues to be debated across one of Earth's strangest natural patterns. Eternal Flame Falls, New York, USA. Hidden inside Chestnut Ridge Park in western New York, a small waterfall conceals something that looks almost impossible. Behind the falling water, inside a shallow rock alcove, a natural flame flickers continuously against the wet stone. The flame is fed by natural gas leaking through the shale beneath the waterfall. That part is understood. What makes the site unusual is the temperature of the rock producing the gas. Conventional geological models normally associate this type of natural gas formation with source rocks heated to much higher temperatures. Yet studies of the shale beneath Eternal Flame Falls found temperatures far below those expected conditions. Scientists have proposed alternative geological processes, but the exact origin of the gas remains an open question. The flame itself occasionally goes out and must be relit, but the gas continues escaping. Water pours down only inches away, while an invisible underground system keeps feeding fuel into the rock. Catatumbo lightning, Venezuela. Near the mouth of the Catatumbo River in western Venezuela, the night sky can explode with lightning for hours at a time, creating one of the most intense electrical displays anywhere on Earth. The storms occur over the Lake Maracaibo region and can return on well over 100 nights during some years. From a distance, flashes can illuminate the horizon so frequently that sailors historically used the phenomenon almost like a natural lighthouse. Scientists understand many of the ingredients involved. Warm, moisture-rich air moves inland from the Caribbean, while cooler air descends from the surrounding Andes. The shape of the basin helps force these air masses together, creating powerful thunderstorm conditions. But researchers still debate why the phenomenon becomes so persistent and concentrated in this exact location. Atmospheric circulation, local topography, moisture, and possibly other regional factors all contribute. Yet, Catatumbo remains an extreme example of nature repeatedly producing the perfect storm in almost the same place. Al-Naslaa Rock, Saudi Arabia. In the desert near Taima, Saudi Arabia, a massive sandstone block stands divided into two halves by a crack so straight that it looks as if someone sliced the rock with an enormous industrial blade. The formation is roughly 20 feet high, and both sections remain balanced on narrow natural bases. What makes Naslaa famous is not simply that the rock fractured, but how clean and nearly vertical the separation appears. Geologists generally believe the split began along a natural fracture or joint inside the sandstone. Over long periods, tectonic stress, erosion, temperature changes, wind, and sand may have widened and polished the opening. That explanation is scientifically reasonable, but the visual precision continues to surprise visitors. Ancient carvings on the rock also prove that people have known this formation for thousands of years. Whether its extraordinary appearance carried special meaning to those communities is unknown, leaving Naslaa suspended somewhere between geology, archaeology, and one remarkable coincidence. Richat structure, Mauritania. Deep in the Sahara Desert lies a formation so enormous that its true shape is difficult to recognize from the ground. From above, however, it looks like a gigantic eye staring directly out of the desert. Known as the Richat structure, or the Eye of the Sahara, this circular feature measures roughly 40 kilometers across and consists of concentric rings of exposed rock. Scientists once suspected a meteorite impact. Later studies showed that the structure is more consistent with a geological dome that was uplifted and gradually eroded over millions of years. That explains the overall formation, but the central depression and the precise arrangement of its rings have continued to generate questions about the detailed processes involved. Researchers have investigated erosion, volcanic activity, hydrothermal systems, and structural collapse as possible contributors. From orbit, the Richat structure appears almost artificial. On the ground, its scale becomes difficult to comprehend, making it one of the most visually unreal geological formations in Africa. Lake Natron, Tanzania. In northern Tanzania, there is a lake whose chemistry is so extreme that dead birds and other animals can become preserved in rigid, mineral-coated forms that look almost like stone statues. Natron is highly alkaline, with water containing concentrated salts and sodium carbonate derived from the volcanic geology of the surrounding region. When animals die in or near the lake, dehydration and mineral deposition can preserve their bodies in unusually stiff forms. The result looks disturbing. But Lake Natron is not a dead environment. Lesser flamingos gather there in enormous numbers, because the harsh chemistry discourages many predators, turning one of Africa's most hostile lakes into an important breeding ground. That contradiction is what makes the place extraordinary. Water capable of damaging skin also supports a specialized ecosystem adapted to conditions most animals could never tolerate. Lake Natron does not violate chemistry, but it shows how extreme chemistry can create a landscape that appears almost impossible for life. Dean's Blue Hole, Bahamas. From above, Dean's Blue Hole looks like a dark, circular opening punched directly into bright turquoise water. Located near Long Island in the Bahamas, it descends more than 200 meters, making it one of the deepest known marine blue holes on Earth. Divers approaching the edge move from shallow tropical water into a vertical underwater shaft that suddenly disappears into darkness. Scientists understand how blue holes formed during periods of lower sea level, when limestone caves developed before being flooded by rising oceans. But Dean's Blue Hole still holds unexplored spaces. Its deeper water contains very little oxygen, and chemical layers support microorganisms adapted to conditions that resemble environments found on early Earth. Researchers have even studied such systems as possible analogues for extraterrestrial habitats. Below the main shaft are additional cavities and passages that remain difficult to reach. The visible hole is impressive enough. What lies beyond its deepest accessible sections is what keeps the mystery open. Socotra Island, Yemen. Far off the coast of Yemen lies an island that looks less like Earth and more like a forgotten world evolving on another planet. Socotra has been isolated from surrounding land masses for millions of years, allowing life to develop along remarkably unusual paths. Its most famous species is the dragon's blood tree, with an umbrella-shaped crown and deep red resin that appears almost like blood when the bark is cut. Across the island, bizarre bottle trees, rare reptiles, unusual birds, and hundreds of endemic plants survive in landscapes of limestone plateaus, caves, and dry mountains. Scientists understand that long isolation helped create this extraordinary biodiversity, but Socotra is still far from fully documented. Political instability and difficult access have limited modern research, leaving parts of its ecosystems poorly studied. After millions of years of separate evolution, scientists still do not know how many unique organisms remain hidden across this strange island. Dancing Forest, Curonian Spit, Russia. On a narrow strip of land beside the Baltic Sea, hundreds of pine trees grow in shapes that seem to ignore the normal rules of a forest. Instead of rising straight toward the sky, their trunks twist, bend, spiral, and sometimes form almost complete loops. This strange woodland is known as the Dancing Forest. Researchers have proposed several explanations. Strong coastal winds may have distorted young trees as they developed. Unstable sandy soil and the unusual microclimate of the Curonian Spit may also influence their growth. Another theory suggests insect larvae damaged the growing tips of young pines, forcing the trunks to change direction. But no single explanation perfectly matches every tree. Some grow almost normally, others twist dramatically only a few feet above the ground. A few curve back toward themselves like giant wooden rings. Whatever combination of forces created them, the Dancing Forest still looks less like natural woodland and more like trees frozen in the middle of an impossible movement. Chocolate Hills, Philippines. Across the island of Bohol, more than 1,000 nearly symmetrical hills rise from the landscape like enormous mounds placed there one after another. During the rainy season, they are covered in green grass, but when the dry season arrives, the vegetation turns brown, transforming the entire landscape into what appears to be an endless field of giant chocolate drops. Geologists generally agree that the hills developed from limestone shaped by erosion, groundwater, rainfall, and geological uplift over immense periods of time. But their extraordinary uniformity continues to attract attention. Why did erosion produce so many similarly shaped cones in one concentrated region? And why have so many maintained their recognizable forms while surrounding landscapes changed? Science can explain the broad geological processes involved, but the precise combination of conditions that produce this immense patterned landscape remains fascinating. Local legend offers another answer. The hills were formed from the tears of a heartbroken giant after losing the woman he loved. Tassili, Niger, Algeria. Deep inside the Sahara Desert, lies a vast landscape of sandstone arches, towering pillars, and ancient rock shelters that preserve evidence of a world almost impossible to imagine today. Tassili, Niger, contains thousands of prehistoric paintings and engravings created across many different periods. They show hunters, cattle, human figures, and animals such as crocodiles and hippopotamuses living in regions that are now almost completely dry. The artwork confirms something extraordinary. The Sahara was once dramatically wetter. But some images have created additional mystery. Certain human figures are painted with unusually large rounded heads and strange body proportions, inspiring countless interpretations ranging from ceremonial masks to religious symbolism. Archaeologists caution against sensational explanations because the original meanings have been lost, and that is exactly what makes Tassili so compelling. Science can reconstruct the changing climate and date many of the paintings, but the beliefs, ceremonies, and messages behind some of the strangest figures disappeared with the people who created them. Zhangye, Danxia, China. In northwestern China, mountains rise from the desert in bands of red, orange, yellow, and green, creating a landscape that looks painted rather than naturally formed. Zhangye, Danxia developed from layers of sandstone and other sediments deposited over millions of years. Different minerals created different colors, while tectonic uplift exposed the layers and erosion slowly carved them into cliffs, ridges, and valleys. Scientists understand the basic geological process. What makes the landscape extraordinary is its scale and precision. Colored layers continue across distant ridges, producing patterns that appear almost perfectly aligned even where valleys separate the mountains. From certain viewpoints, the bands resemble enormous brushstrokes stretching across the desert. There is no evidence that the colors are unexplained. The mystery is how ordinary geological forces, repeated over immense spans of time, created something that looks so deliberately designed. Zhangye, Danxia proves that nature does not need paint to create a masterpiece. Sigiriya, Sri Lanka. Rising nearly vertically above the forests of central Sri Lanka, Sigiriya looks like a giant stone fortress, placed where construction should have been almost impossible. During the 5th century, King Kashyapa transformed the massive rock into a royal complex containing stairways, walls, gardens, pools, terraces, and buildings near its summit. Archaeologists understand who built Sigiriya and much of what it was used for. The remarkable question is how such an ambitious project was completed at this height with ancient technology. Workers had to move enormous quantities of brick, stone, timber, and water upward while constructing along steep, exposed cliffs. Even more impressive, sophisticated hydraulic gardens below the rock could operate using carefully controlled water pressure. The techniques were not magical, but their execution remains astonishing. Today, visitors climb past ancient frescoes and the enormous Lion Gate, following a route created more than 15 centuries ago toward a palace built above the clouds. Manpupuner rock formations, Russia. On an isolated plateau in Russia's northern Ural region, 7 enormous stone pillars rise above the wilderness like the remains of a civilization that never existed. Some reach heights comparable to a multi-story building, yet several have surprisingly narrow bases that make them appear almost ready to fall. Geologists believe these pillars are remnants of ancient mountains. Over immense periods of time, wind, rain, freezing temperatures, and ice destroyed the softer surrounding rock, while harder stone cores remain standing. The overall process is understood, but the final shapes are so unusual that they still appear almost artificial. Local Mansi legends describe the pillars as giants turned to stone. Reaching them is also difficult. Roads do not lead directly to the plateau, and many visitors arrive by helicopter or long wilderness expeditions. In winter, snow covers the landscape completely, leaving 7 dark stone figures standing alone above an empty white world. Tsingy de Bemaraha, Madagascar. In western Madagascar, the ground rises into a forest made not of trees, but millions of razor-sharp limestone blades. Tsingy de Bemaraha formed as rainwater slowly dissolved ancient limestone, widening fractures and carving the landscape into pinnacles, caves, canyons, and narrow stone corridors. The word Tsingy is often associated with the idea of walking where the ground is too sharp for bare feet, and the description fits. Some formations are so narrow and jagged that crossing them requires suspension bridges, ladders, ropes, and elevated walkways. Yet inside this dangerous stone labyrinth, animals and plants have evolved in isolated pockets that can be difficult for scientists to reach. Geologists understand how the limestone was shaped. But the terrain continues to hide biological surprises. Rare lemurs, reptiles, and other species survive within valleys separated by walls of stone, turning Tsingy into both a geological fortress and a natural laboratory of evolution. Three Whale Rock, Thailand. High above the forests of northeastern Thailand, three enormous sandstone formations lie side by side like a family of whales swimming through a sea of clouds. Known as Hin Samwan, or Three Whale Rock, the formations are estimated to be tens of millions of years old. Wind, rainfall, and long-term erosion gradually removed softer sections of sandstone, leaving behind three curved rock bodies aligned in an almost unbelievable pattern. Scientists understand the forces that shape them. What nature does not explain intentionally is the resemblance. From above, the largest formations look like adult whales moving beside a smaller one, complete with long backs extending toward the horizon. Visitors can walk across two of the rocks, where steep edges drop toward the jungle below. The smallest formation is more difficult to access safely. At sunrise, mist fills the valleys, hiding the mountain beneath and creating the illusion that these giant stone whales are truly floating above the clouds. Moeraki boulders, New Zealand. Along Kwekauhei Beach in New Zealand, enormous spherical stones lie scattered across the sand like giant eggs washed ashore from another world. Some Moeraki boulders weigh several tons and measure more than 6 feet across. Their surfaces can be smooth and round, while broken examples reveal internal cracks filled with minerals in patterns resembling turtle shells. Scientists know these stones are natural concretions. They began forming inside ancient seafloor sediments as minerals gradually accumulated around organic material. Over millions of years, the surrounding mudstone hardened, and coastal erosion eventually released the boulders onto the beach. So the broad explanation is not a mystery. Their almost perfect shapes are what make them visually astonishing. Maori tradition offers another story, describing them as baskets and food containers washed ashore from a legendary canoe wreck. Today, waves continue exposing new boulders while slowly destroying others, making the shoreline a geological scene that is still changing. Giant's Causeway, Northern Ireland. Along the coast of Northern Ireland, tens of thousands of stone columns fit together so precisely that the shoreline looks like an enormous road constructed by giants. Most of the columns are hexagonal, although other shapes also appear. Some rise like steps from the Atlantic, while others form towering walls of tightly packed basalt. Geologists have a strong explanation. Around 60 million years ago, volcanic lava spread across the region. As the molten rock cooled and contracted, cracks formed in repeating polygonal patterns, eventually creating roughly 40,000 columns. Science explains the process. But seeing the result makes it difficult to believe that no architect was involved. Irish legend gives the landscape a different origin, claiming the giant Finn McCool built a stone causeway across the sea towards Scotland. Whether viewed through geology or mythology, Giant's Causeway is a fitting ending, a place where perfectly understood natural laws still produce something that looks completely impossible. Sailing Stones, Death Valley, USA. Across a dry lake bed in Death Valley, massive rocks leave long trails behind them as if they have been slowly moving across the desert by themselves. For decades, no one actually saw the stones move. Some weighed hundreds of pounds, yet tracks stretched across the surface of racetrack playa without footprints, machinery, or obvious evidence of human involvement. The mystery inspired theories involving powerful winds, magnetic forces, and even unexplained phenomena. Eventually, researchers captured the movement directly. During rare winter conditions, shallow water freezes into thin sheets of ice around the stones. As the ice breaks apart and gentle winds push the floating panels across the playa, the rocks can slide slowly over wet mud, leaving tracks behind them. The mystery was largely solved, but the phenomenon remains extremely rare and difficult to witness. A desert rock moving almost silently across an empty lake bed still looks impossible, even when science finally knows how it happens. Yonaguni Monument, Japan. Beneath the waters off Japan's Yonaguni Island lies a massive formation of terraces, flat platforms, and sharp angles that looks disturbingly similar to the ruins of a submerged city. The structure was discovered by divers in the 1980s and quickly triggered debate. Some researchers have argued that parts of Yonaguni may have been shaped or modified by ancient people. Others point to the local sandstone, which naturally fractures along horizontal bedding planes and vertical joints, producing surprisingly straight edges and stair-like forms. Most geological evidence favors a largely natural origin. But one question keeps the mystery alive. Could ancient inhabitants have discovered the formation while sea levels were lower and altered portions of it for their own purposes? No convincing archaeological evidence has settled that possibility. Today, Yonaguni remains suspended between geology and archaeology, an underwater monument that looks far more deliberate than nature should be able to create. Longyu Caves, China. Beneath Zhejiang province lies an underground complex so enormous that removing the rock required a construction effort almost impossible to hide from history. The Longyu Caves were revealed in 1992 after villagers drained ponds believed to be bottomless. Beneath them were enormous man-made chambers, supported by massive pillars, with walls and ceilings covered in remarkably consistent chisel patterns. Researchers have identified 24 nearby caverns, some reaching around 30 meters high. Engineering studies show that these structures have remained surprisingly stable for roughly 2,000 years. But the largest questions are historical. Who ordered such an enormous project? What were the chambers used for? And why do surviving records say so little about their construction? Millions of tons of excavated stone also have no clearly documented destination. Longyu is undeniably human-made. Yet the civilization, purpose, organization, and methods behind this underground world remain frustratingly incomplete. Lake Untersee, Antarctica. In East Antarctica, a permanently ice-covered lake hides an ecosystem so unusual that researchers study it for clues about how life might survive on other worlds. Untersee has exceptionally unusual chemistry, including highly alkaline water, elevated dissolved oxygen, methane, and very low carbon dioxide. Beneath the ice, scientists have discovered cone-shaped microbial structures rising from the lake floor. They resemble microbial communities associated with some of the oldest biological structures preserved in Earth's geological record. That makes Untersee more than another frozen Antarctic lake. Its microorganisms survive beneath thick ice, in cold water, under conditions radically different from most modern freshwater ecosystems. Scientists understand many of the chemical processes involved, but they are still investigating why this particular lake developed such unusual conditions and microbial formations. For astrobiologists, Untersee offers a rare possibility, a living laboratory showing how simple organisms might persist beneath ice far beyond Earth. Plain of Jars, Laos. Across the highlands of Laos, more than 2,000 enormous stone jars stand scattered across hillsides and plateaus as if an ancient civilization abandoned them without explanation. Some were carved from massive blocks of stone and transported from quarry areas to locations kilometers away. Archaeological evidence strongly connects the jars with Iron Age funerary practices, and surrounding sites contain burials, stone discs, grave markers, quarries, and other mortuary remains. So their broad function is becoming clearer. But the civilization behind them remains surprisingly mysterious. Researchers still want to understand how communities organized the quarrying and transportation of such heavy monuments, how rituals differed between sites, and why this megalithic tradition spread across such a large landscape. The people who created the jars left no written explanation. What remains is an enormous archaeological cemetery whose stones have survived long after the society that gave them meaning disappeared. Crooked Forest, Poland. In northwestern Poland, hundreds of pine trees grow with the same bizarre shape. Their trunks bend sharply near the ground before curving upward again, creating an entire forest of giant wooden hooks. Known as the Crooked Forest, the trees were planted around the early 20th century. Their similar bends make a purely random natural explanation difficult to accept. The leading theory is human intervention. Foresters may have deliberately shaped young trees to produce curved timber for furniture, boats, or construction. According to this interpretation, the project was interrupted before the trees could be harvested, possibly during the upheaval surrounding World War II. But no surviving record definitively explains who bent them or what the timber was intended for. The biology is understandable. Damaged or redirected trees can continue growing upward. What remains missing is human intent. The the people who shaped this forest disappeared, leaving hundreds of living trees still carrying the same unfinished design.